I'll call to order this meeting of the Harbor Shellfish Advisory Board, Tuesday, May 21st, 5 p.m., 2019. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approval of minutes, draft minutes for May 7th.
I have a typo. In the recap and items for next meeting, about a third of the way down, Ms. Andrews asked how the wind turbines should be repaired. Otherwise, I'm okay.
Anything else? Motion to approve as adjusted. Somebody? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Annual Town Ethics Online Training Reminder. Peter?
Did everybody get the email that I sent out about that?
I didn't do it, yeah.
Mandatory committee and board members, state ethics, online training, distribution of the summary of the conflict of interest law and EEO discrimination policy. You got till June 1 to do it. If anyone didn't get it, I'll send it to you.
I saw you email me something I haven't had a chance to open.
Okay.
Maybe tonight I'll get on that.
Okay.
I think it's in there, but if you'd send it to me again, I'd appreciate it.
I thought I got it from the town. Did you send it a couple weeks ago?
We are the town.
I meant from some woman, not
Yeah, you
you.
might have gotten it from the town.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Maureen Coleman.
You, Maureen, okay, right, good, okay.
Reminder to all board members, especially our new members, traditionally we vote on a summer schedule, July and August meeting once for July, once for August versus 2 times those 2 months. Keep that in mind. Look at your calendars. It could be the first Tuesday or the third Tuesday that we meet on in either month. So check things out and see what your availability looks like. If, and you can also vote against doing this and prefer to have 2 meetings per month. So think about it. We'll talk about it again at the next meeting. Marine Department report. Not seeing Sheila. Will continue. Natural Resources Department. Tara, do you have something for us? You can sit.
Come here and sit.
You don't have to stand at it. You can sit, but it would be nice if you were heard in the microphone.
That one doesn't work.
We are being streamed live somewhere.
The Twilight Zone.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I'm Tara Riley, shellfish biologist. I don't know all of you, but I look forward to getting to know you. I want to apologize for not being here for quite a long time. We've been taking a class on Tuesday evenings with Roger Williams University that involves applied shellfish farming. So that class is complete. So we're really happy that all the hatchery was able to do that online. And so we're back and available on Tuesday evenings. So if you guys have not been down to the Brant Point Shellfish Hatchery, I want to invite everyone to come down. We're usually there from 6 a.m. to about 2 p.m. every day. If that doesn't work for you, just let me know, and I'm happy to provide a different time and meet you down there. We're also there on weekends, too, if that's helpful. So I will just update you real quickly on what's going on in the hatchery. This year we're spawning oysters and bay scallops, and if we have time, we might throw some mussels in there. We're not really sure what we're doing, but today we had our 3rd oyster spawn, and I think we had about 90 million eggs that we got. So we'll drain those down in 2 days, and we'll find out, what hatched out and what's going to survive. We are working on bay scallop spawns right now. We have 1 set of larvae in the tanks right now, around 10 million, and then we're going to be spawning later this week, and we spawn all the way through the end of August. So as we have available space in the hatchery, we'll just keep the tanks full as we go. As far as what is going out in the harbor, for those of you that are actively out in the harbor, we have spat lines out right now. You'll see them in Nantucket Harbor and Nantucket Harbor, and we have a couple in Hither Creek. The main purpose of those is to collect the wild spat of bay scallops. They need something to attach to, so we put out the spat bags. They have a material inside that they adhere to, and then we can collect them and determine when the spawn occurred and, kind of gauge, where they might be settling. So we have a lot in the head of the harbor, and the reason why we did that is because there's really not a lot of habitat up there, but with the way the circulation of that harbor goes, a lot of the spat end up there. And so without the habitat, they kind of just perish. But the reason why it piqued our interest is it's collecting on all the oyster cages from the oyster farmers up there. So we put our spat lines kind of around the whole 60-acre grid, and we're going to see if we can capitalize on catching some of those spat, and then growing them out at our outdoor facility on the dock there, and then putting them into a place in the harbor where we can do kind of like a scientific planting density study. So there's that. We have the other project that we have associated with spat collection in Hither Creek involves Valerie Hall, and she is determining if scallops will recruit to Hither Creek. So she needed some assistance with the boat and deployment, so we did that for her. What else do we have? Spawn cages. We're gonna have spawn cages out. So all of our gear has a buoy that's rocket red. It's very bright. It says Shellfish research on it. Our cages go out. We have about 60 bay scallops that we put in each cage, and the idea is when the water warms up, they spawn, and then the chance of fertilization is greater because they're all kind of stuck in the same cage, and it's just like an extensive way to do some shellfish propagation. In September, we have Steve Tettelbach from Stony Brook University and Stephen Heck, who's a PhD candidate. He was actually my first intern, and they're coming to do a extensive study on Nantucket Harbor involving the eelgrass surveys, and they're also going to do a baseline study on the bay scallop population, and they're actually including the conch population too. They wanted to focus on the two commercial species that we get out of the harbor. So they're going to do that because the bay scallop season was so crappy this year. We just want to kind of know where we're starting from moving forward in our management decisions and what we're going to be doing as far as the hatchery goes and any outside projects. We've really been focusing on education this year. We have a memorial fund that we're utilizing where we've gotten some graphics done for the hatchery on shellfish life cycles and anatomy that are going to be displayed above our spawning tables so that it will aid in some of our tours and talks that we give. We also have initiated a self-guided tour so people can come in and walk around various areas of the hatchery and read about what each area is for, and we'll be there working and available to answer questions but not have to stop everything that we're doing to walk people through. And then we're working on a storyboard for kids so that we can go to the schools and reach the kid population that aren't able to travel to the hatchery with their various classes and stuff. So we'll be able to explain what we do in the hatchery and the shellfish and the interactions of the harbor and water quality and why that's important since they live here on the island. And let's see, we have 2 shell recycling interns right now for Leah Cabral's Shuck It for Nantucket program. And they're out collecting shells from, I think, pretty much every restaurant in Nantucket is participating in this program and recycling their shells now. And I have 2 hatchery interns. I have David Berry, who's in his 6th year of being a hatchery intern. And then we have Emily Whitaker, who just graduated from Auburn University, who's working with us this summer as well. And other than that, I think that is all I have. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Tara, could you please mention the Stony Brook Harbor study, their affiliation with Peter Boyce?
Sure. Peter Boyce was involved in doing spat collections when he was here. He did them all over Nantucket Harbor. He also was in charge of doing, they kind of did like some fall surveys involving the scallop population, dive surveys specifically. And we haven't really continued those since he left. And so we decided that it was time to engage a group that was able to do it in an efficient way. So that involves Steve Tettelbach and some of his colleagues and Stephen Heck. And they have some of their own interests as well, as far as like, studying conch and stuff like that. So that's how that project came up. It's in the proposal phase right now, but I'm pretty confident that it's going to be funded.
Just for new members of the board, Peter Boyce served on this board. He's a scientist and spent a lot of time in the harbor here researching. So he's still connected with this program, Tara?
He was included on the grant for this project, so he was invited to come up and participate as well.
Can you please explain to me what a spat line is?
Sure. Spat line is basically like a 25-foot line that has 2 cinder blocks on each end. It's got 3 buoys to keep it floating, and in between the 3 buoys, we've got 5 spat bags. They're, I think, 0.75 millimeter netting, and then inside is a plastic netron. Basically, it looks like a net, and it's kind of like a hard plastic. So we put that inside of the bag, and the bag floats on the surface of the water. And bay scallops in their larval phase for the first 10 to 12 days of their life are in the upper part of the water column. And so when they're looking for something to settle on, a lot of times they can swim through the actual bag and set on the netron, and then they stick there, and then they start growing, and then they can't get out. It's not like we're collecting all of the spat. It's not like they're all going to go in there, but it's an indication for us when a spawn occurred and where they might be congregating based on where we put our lines. Some lines we might get, I think our best line, we got 2,000 in one collection.
Wow.
And other lines, if you were to put one in pulpus, you would get nothing. So it's just kind of what your goals are with spat lines.
Any issues with mariners?
Every once in a while we'll have a cut line, but they're pretty visible, I think.
To my far right is David Bossy, new member, Tara Riley. To my far left, Tom Sidlowski. I think you know the rest of us, Ginger, Dan, myself, Peter, and Dave. Okay. Board members, any questions in particular for Tara?
Are there days and hours specific for the self-guided hatchery tour?
We don't have that yet. We are still waiting on the graphics. Those are going off to the shop on Friday, and so we're hoping to get those back probably by the end of July. So not really sure yet how that's going to go.
Would you prefer we wait for that? I've been meaning to get down there to take a tour, or is it just
No,
stop
I think
down?
you guys need the full tour, so you guys
okay.
should come and listen to everything.
All right.
So,
Okay.
Sounds good.
yeah, pick a time and come visit.
I suggest when you do that, some of us may want to join too, so we can make a party of it.
Okay.
Public questions for Tara in particular, for natural resources?
Do you know how much spat you released in 2017?
Okay, so the question he asked was how much spat was released in 2017 and 2018. So last year we did around probably 100 million, and that was really late releases. So everything was released in the end of August and September. We had some problems as far as getting them to spawn and getting them ripe. And so most of those bay scallops, I feel like, went into the winter as really tiny nubs. In 2017, I'll have to look back and see. I don't recall off the top of my head, but most of our numbers, our lowest year was 70 million and our highest year was almost 200 million. So, I mean, those numbers don't really matter unless they recruit and take. So we're definitely well aware of that. And all it takes is, if you have a 10 million release and they take, it doesn't, it can be the same thing as 200 million that you don't do well. So we're just trying to do our best.
Nice job.
Mr. Kuntz has a question.
I was just wondering, you said that when you released them, they were smaller sizes. Is that what corresponded with the poor harvest of the year?
We don't really know, because what we did in the hatchery, probably it went into the winter question is right now whether it survived the winter and where it is, because you can't really see it when it's that size. So probably next month we'll get into the water and do some dive surveys and go back to some places where we know that we saw the tiny nubs, and do a few more surveys and just kind of see if anything survived and where it might be.
Did you have any reason for the poor harvest last year?
You know, there's so many variables that go into it. Everybody asks me this question, and it's really difficult to answer. So, if you guys have any theories, I'd love to hear them. But, you know, I think the island is changing. I think that we have a lot of new pressures that are coming into play that we didn't have before. Even 10 years ago when I first got here, I feel like things have changed so much. And if you want to know, you know, what I think about that in detail, I'm happy to sit down and tell you.
I'd like to hear that.
I'm going to ask the board to approve taking business out of order, to listen to the Nantucket Land Council's Executive Director, Emily Molden, and she's going to give us a report on what their goals and objectives are for the, and which, you know, what their focus is going to be, and she's going to make herself available for future meetings also. So, you know, if you think of questions later on or have too many now, we'll try to keep it limited and listen to what she has to say. So, are we all okay with taking business out of order?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. Emily?
Thanks, Andy, and thanks for the invitation to come talk tonight. I think I know all of you except for maybe Dave and Tom as well. So I'm Emily Molden. I'm the new executive director of the Nantucket Land Council. Just transitioned into the position a couple of months ago, but have been the ecologist with the Land Council for almost 15 years. So have been around for a little while. So I guess for your benefit as well, if you are not that familiar with us, at our core, we're more of an environmental advocacy group, and we do a lot of work around policy and the regulatory agencies in town, the select board, but we also do some land protection, and then we have a really strong focus on water quality. And a lot of our education and research programs are really aimed at some of the island's biggest issues as far as policies go and water protection go. So we kind of build and develop our programs around whatever those issues are as they kind of change over time. And I think that right now our goals and objectives are more or less what they have been the last couple of years. We are spending a lot of our research time focusing on the harbors and the harbor habitat. I think, like Tara said, we've kind of seen that things have been changing, pressures have been changing on Nantucket, and we have done a lot of work in conjunction with the town over the years, especially with water quality and with the Natural Resources Department. And we sort of are starting to move away a little bit from just being so focused on the nutrient levels and the TMDL, which is still a really important component, but with all the other variables, I think we're all starting to focus a little bit more on habitat in general and other sort of farther reaching impacts. So as far as some of those research projects, we initiated last year a couple of new big projects focused on the eelgrass out in the harbor. Back in 2015, when we worked with the town to update the aerial survey and do the eelgrass mapping, I think we all realized how much of a decline there has been in the eelgrass overall, sort of large scale. So we thought that it would be a really good time to start doing some more sort of focused research on the health of the eelgrass itself. So we have been working with a consultant from Boston University, a seagrass specialist, and she started working on two different projects with us. One is basically an overall health assessment. So we ended up selecting 6 different sites in Nantucket Harbor and collecting some baseline data just on general parameters the density of the beds, the length of the blades, epiphyte growth on the blades, that sort of thing, and also did some stable isotope analysis of the blades that gives us a little bit more information on the kind of nitrogen in the plants and where it might be coming from. And that's kind of an exciting project because, again, it's looking a little bit more closely at the plants and the beds themselves and what's going on with them and how they might compare to eelgrass in other communities regionally. So we're she's still working through that data from last summer now. We're waiting for some of it. We don't really anticipate it to be anything mind-blowing at this point, but to really serve as some great baseline that we'll be able to look at and monitor it more closely with going forward. But a couple of the big limiting factors that the data is showing that Nantucket Harbor deals with that we sort of know already are light penetration to the eelgrass in a lot of the areas, and also maybe temperature could be playing a role as well as far as how warm the water is getting in the summertime. So we're taking a closer look at that. And then she also helped us initiate a new eelgrass transplant project that you may have heard about off of Monomoy, off of Second Pier, where we're pretty sure that some sediment movement in the recent past covered some pre-existing eelgrass beds. So we went through the permitting process and began transplanting some plants from Hussey Shoal, which is, as you know, a really healthy eelgrass bed, to an area just off Second Pier in Monomoy, which has been established as an exclusion zone with the help of the harbor master through last winter. So we know that the plants survived the winter. We went out to take a look, and our consultant's coming back probably in a couple weeks to do some follow-up monitoring. And then in June, we'll go back out and do some additional planting at that site. And then we'll follow up again in the fall and do some more planting to fill it in and sort of see how everything starts to coalesce at that point. And then reassess. The area is about 1/2 acre total. So we have several transects that we're just working on filling in there. So that kind of covers the eelgrass. I will say that this summer, as far as the health assessment study, we're hoping to set up some transects in Nantucket Harbor as well, so that we can collect some more specific data for Nantucket Harbor, and then we'll be able to watch the beds out there over time also. The other harbor projects that we want to continue and maybe expand upon is some of the green crab sampling that we've been doing. We were working with the Maria Mitchell Association in the town for the last 2 years on kind of a more intensive population study around Hussey Shoal, but the number of crabs that we were trapping last year was just too low to really tell us anything substantial. So I'm going to kind of shift tacks a little bit and I think focus on doing more of a distribution sampling, so at least seasonally or twice a season, set out some traps all over the harbor, hopefully in Nantucket and Nantucket, just over time to be able to look at numbers and where the crabs are and how those densities maybe are changing or not. I do know that based on other folks I've talked to in other coastal communities, the number of crabs that we've gotten in our traps are nothing compared to what they get, say, up in Great Marsh or some other areas, but we definitely have them, so we need to keep an eye on that. So we want to do a little bit more work looking at their population. The stormwater monitoring that we started a couple of years ago was focused on a few different culverts. We really wanted to start to get a better understanding of what was coming out of the storm drains, and also just help to increase education and awareness about the infrastructure. And it did actually stimulate a lot of really great conversations with the DPW about what in the world was going on with all of the infrastructure downtown. The data itself that we did get, there was nothing too alarming in it, except for some areas where there clearly, because of bacteria counts, was some cross-contamination with sewer, which I think the DPW has become more aware of. Sort of a side project that spurred off of that is we hired some off-island consultants to work with the DPW to start to try to design some infrastructure improvements at the town parking lot by Washington Street by the town pier, because the town's contemplating redoing that parking lot area, and then there'll be some work done with the pier, so it might be an ideal time to improve the outfall at that location and potentially do some more vegetated wetland, find some ways to treat some of that water before it empties right out into the harbor. So we're hoping to be able to use some of that work that we've done and continue working with the town and DPW to focus on assisting with either design or moving some infrastructure improvements forward as it's possible. Obviously, these things are pretty expensive and take time.
Excuse me, Emily.
Sure.
The land council hired an engineer to specifically work on
Yes.
town pier or town parking lot.
To design some options, alternative options for stormwater management in that location around the parking lot. So we're still working with Rob on that one. That's been moving a little bit slower because they've been waiting to finalize plans for the parking lot itself and the town pier. But we've been, it's Horsley Witten over on the mainland, and we've been in conversations with them. They've been over doing some survey work and brainstorming some good ideas. The other place that we've been working with Horsley Witten on stormwater design improvements is out at the landfill site itself. They have almost completed their report on the waste options facility, the materials recovery facility, that whole site, all of those pre-existing swales and catchment areas were never really designed for the loads that the dump sees today. And so there's a lot of runoff that is basically getting discharged directly into the surrounding wetlands, which, as we know, sort of heads into Long Pond when there's big rain events. And there's so much compost that just sits there on the soil right now because there's so much landscaping waste. And again, just I think the intensity of the use of the site has gone beyond what it was originally developed for. So Horsley Witten is coming up with some great designs to make some pretty simple improvements out there that will help to treat some of that site-specific runoff that Rob's going to work on implementing and including in sort of his bigger picture campus upgrades out there. So that's one thing we've been doing to try to help with some stormwater concerns. A couple of other things. I'm actually meeting with Thais, the new water quality specialist, tomorrow afternoon to try to brainstorm some other ways that we can support the town's work moving into the summer. Last year we did some supplemental sampling along the shoreline of the harbor in conjunction with the town when they were doing some of their standard sampling for nitrogen and phosphorus nutrients at the Sentinel stations, which is, you probably know, are right around the deepest parts of the harbor out in the middle. We wanted to do some additional sampling right along the shoreline. Presumably it's all pretty well mixed, but because the eelgrass is actually a lot closer to the shoreline, we just want to make sure that what's getting sampled for the big picture data is really representative of what these most fragile parts of the ecosystem are experiencing. So we're still waiting for that to come back in. We might continue that this summer as well. Just a couple quick points from the freshwater side of things. There's a PhD student at UMass Amherst, Matt Devine, who we brought out last summer to do some exploratory sampling for juvenile herring in the Great Ponds. And we were able to do some net tows in Hummock Pond and at least confirm that there were a lot of juvenile herring in there. So the herring had gotten up into the pond from the opening. But we're really interested in what happens to them from there on out and just how the population dynamic works in that pond, since it's only open twice a year, so they have limited access in and out. And then also to do some additional sampling in Long Pond, hopefully maybe Sacajah, because as you know, the fish are one of the big reasons for opening the pond, but there's just very little data out there about how they're actually using them. And as the town continues to move forward in discussions about pond management, that's going to be an important piece to the puzzle in terms of how and when they're opened. So we're going to do some additional herring sampling in the ponds this summer as well. So instead of me just continuing to talk, there's also a lot of educational programs that we're going to do in conjunction with a lot of this and outreach. And as I said, hope to support work that the town will be doing as well, however we can. That's kind of big picture. A lot of them are projects that we kind of just started last year and we're hoping to just sort of expand upon and move through this season.
Dave, Mr. Franzuto.
Emily, how are you?
Hi, good Dave, good to see you.
I just got a couple questions, just a couple from my own catch up to speed here. What sediment transport, what do you think caused the sediment transport to overtop your eelgrass?
Well, that basically, just from looking at aerials, it seemed as though maybe there was a shoaling event or something that took place, because when you look at the aerials from prior to about 2012, you can really see a lot of healthy eelgrass in that area off Monomoy. But then all of a sudden, after maybe the 2013, 2014 winters, it's just sand. And it just seemed to
So you
have
think it was sand
disappeared. So, I mean, that's because the water quality in that part of the harbor is better. It's much better flushed.
Yeah.
And so it seems as though it should be able to support eelgrass. And our best guess is that it got buried.
Tara, are you guys, are we seeing any improvement, noticeable improvement due to the jetties flushing better?
I think it's gonna take a little bit of
A little bit more?
before we see it. I think after we sample this season, I think we'll be able to compare to last season and the season before that, and then we'll have some
Okay.
good information.
Who's your consultant for the eelgrass?
Her name's Alyssa Novak. She's a assistant research professor at Boston University.
Okay. Years ago, there was designs, plans made to do all those outfall pipes along Washington Street. I think you guys funded some of that. Land
At
Council.
Consu Springs, we did.
Okay, well, I'm going to get to Consu in a minute, but there are designs for all of those outfall pipes along Washington Street to run them out above grade, so you don't end up with the sediment that gets, trapped in there. And the one under the town pier, for instance, runs out at, underneath the design was for it to be underneath the pier about this high above the beach, so you ended up with, decent water flow and not having to clean that pipe every 20 minutes. There are infiltrators in that town parking lot already. I don't think that they've ever been cleaned, and I also don't think that they were installed properly. So I don't think they've been working properly. Just my observation. Consu Springs, did the work get done for the outfall pipes that go through that rock to have a flush there, or we're not there yet, or we're still talking about dredging the pond out? Where are we at with that? Because you guys funded numerous things for that along the last 20-some years.
Yes, and so there were permits issued to upgrade those culverts and to do some dredge work. It has not happened yet, and a decision was made with the town to put that on hold because there were some concerns that more could be done in order to potentially even expand a little bit of the pond and do a full-on removal of the Phragmites from the area, and also potentially change and upgrade the stormwater infrastructure running into that area from farther up in the catchment to improve capacity for the future. So instead of just trying to do a good job, the decision was made that there was a little bit more that could be done to actually really do it properly.
Okay.
So it hasn't happened yet, but we're still.
Because along that same line, I think that it's important that I guess if I remember correctly, there would actually be a tidal flush through the culverts,
Right.
but obviously the bad stuff that's in that pond is going to have to go somewhere and be capped and contained, because it's not going to be, you're not going to use it for landfill cover, you're not gonna be able to put it on the beach, it's probably pretty nasty stuff. The other thing is that that man-made wetland by Great Harbor Yacht Club, which was designed to treat the stormwater from Union Street, Orange Street, and that lower Washington Street, Francis Street, that whole watershed goes down into that man-made wetland that we built. And one of the things that I'm gonna be asking this board to do is some again, monitoring of that, and I don't believe that has been maintained properly, so therefore it's not treating the stormwater like it's supposed to have been. So anyway, that's one of the things that I'm gonna be asking the board to take a look at.
I do know at that location that there was a requirement from the Conservation Commission to submit monitoring reports of the actual storm water, the effluent, for a number of years after they were installed, and they did that, and then they came back and they got permission from the Conservation Commission to cease that testing. But as far as further ongoing maintenance of that site, I'm not.
No, I was down there recently, and I don't think it's working like it's supposed to.
And obviously, a lot of the issues that you're bringing up too has to do with ongoing maintenance. A lot of the infrastructure itself that just hasn't been cleaned out and hasn't been maintained. And that's a lot of what we were uncovering when we started doing our stormwater sampling and trying to collect samples and figure out what was coming from where. And Chuck Larson and Rob McNeil got to town, and we started popping manhole covers left and right, and everyone was kind of scratching their heads and yeah, but there's.
I talked to Rob O'Neill, or actually he talked to me, about the stormwater treatment filters up by the high school. And those again, that's another perfect example. That was to treat all of that runoff that was headed towards Orange Street and Union Street and ultimately the harbor. And they didn't know they were there. Subsequently, they hadn't been cleaned, and they're full of beer cans and stuff. Oh, anyway, so that's great. Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, you got it.
Just to butt in on the storm drains, Dave, last night Rob McNeil had a presentation at the Nantucket Shellfish Association meeting, and he gently touched on storm drains, did not have any specific priorities where he was going to begin, but it's certainly on his radar, and I hope to hear more from him. And with Emily and the Land Council, with their ability, to monitor this, and also landfill runoff, and also to maintain communication with the DPW director is very admirable, because I would imagine there are times when that could become tense, and maybe your presence there would not be, appreciated maybe, but it's good that you're there to be watching these things, because I think a lot of people are concerned about them, and we hope in the future that we see some reports in the mail from the Land Council and or however you may be sending things out. And I was wondering if you're working on any type of public outreach and education programs in certain areas. Rob presented some things that they've come up with on hazardous waste and also storm drains last night, but and the NSA is also working on contracting somebody to make little 2-minute films that are kind of emotional, maybe tear jerkers about the environment that make people think, and I kind of see them happening all the time and wish I had a camera in my hands. But is the Land Council working on any programs like that at all?
Yeah, well, I will just first say that Rob McNeil has been great to work with and has been doing a lot, I think, to refocus the DPW's efforts on the stormwater system and the needs that as far as cleaning and maintenance go. So we're really pleased with what he's been doing so far and the communication that we've been able to have with him. So I'm sure hopefully that will continue. And then as far as outreach, yes, we'll do a number of public programs throughout the summer that focus on harbor water quality and pond water quality. There was one new little educational initiative that we had been talking with the hatchery about, and it probably won't make it for this year, but maybe next year. I don't know if any of you have been over in Hyannis, kind of walking between the ferries and seeing the upweller that's on the dock there that basically shows shellfish. It has oysters there growing, and they'd have water circulating from the harbor in there. And it has a really great visual display about how they're filter feeders and what they're doing to improve water quality and why we're happy to have them there besides just to eat. And it's really a great educational tool that we've been in conversations about how to maybe get one of those downtown somewhere. That would be a great visual. Yeah, and I think that the hatchery does, I mean, they have them at the hatchery, obviously, but to try to get one somewhere that we could kind of work on together, that would be a little bit more interactive for the public.
We had one at the town pier for
Did you?
a long time. Yeah, it was kind of cool.
Yeah, so maybe get something like that going again, but yeah, I mean, and we'll have our newsletters out, and we're hoping to do we've also hired a drone photographer to try to get some footage of some of our projects so that we can make some videos too, also the harbor shoreline and just general images of use. I mean, the intensity of use of the harbor in the summer season is something that has changed and has continued to increase a bit. So even just being able to graphically display what the harbor looks like for a lot of the off season compared to the middle of the summer, for people, a little bit of shock and awe there as far as that kind of impact. So we're definitely brainstorming a few similar little educational tools.
Got a question.
Peter?
Has the harbor, I guess, improvement annual grant from the Great Harbor Yacht Club, is that expired, or is it still going?
There's one more year, yeah. Mm-hmm. One more year funding from that. Last year it went towards our eelgrass
Right.
health assessment work, which we're wrapping up.
And then another question. The Land Council did do a pilot project transplanting eelgrass, or planting eelgrass, didn't they? And it wasn't as successful as you guys wanted?
Right, so back in 2007, I believe, we worked with Dr. Dave Burdick from University of New Hampshire, and we did do a transplant site. It was up in Quays, and there were a few differences back then. We used a different technique of planting them. We used these turf frames, which the eelgrass was tied to, just using some biodegradable tie, the eelgrass shoots. And then the turf frames themselves, these grids, were kind of anchored in place. And there were a couple of issues with it ultimately. One is the turf frames, which were still somewhat experimental and new, they discovered they tend to move a bit, and if they get shifted and disturbed, then the roots themselves can get sort of pulled out of the ground. Now the method we're using is literally with, essentially almost like with a trowel, you're just planting the plugs and just stapling them right into the sediment. So they're a little bit more stable down there. But the other issue, being up in Quays, the water quality was not as good. The light penetration was poor, and we had a pretty big bloom of algae that subsequent summer, and so none of it survived. Monomoy is a much more likely place for something like this to be successful, because as far as the water quality in that part of the harbor, I know back in 2017 and maybe previously, the harbor does meet its total maximum daily load for nitrogen in that part of the harbor. So water quality is definitely better there than it is, and circulation, obviously clarity. So, but yes, you're right. We did try it once before and learned a few lessons. And
there was a lot of lingbia, right? Up
yes,
in Quays that just sort of smothered everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It did. That's exactly what it was. It smothered our transplants. Mm-hmm.
It was also a very exposed site.
It was an exposed site, yes. Mm-hmm.
Emily, at a meeting in the recent past, our health director mentioned some possible regulation changes about fertilizers.
Yes. So I just have stepped onto the Fertilizer Advisory Committee and filling in my new role. So I'm still a little bit new to that. But yes, there are some changes proposed to the fertilizer regulations. And it really has a lot to do with reporting and the Health Department and Natural Resources Department's ability to get data from landscapers on what kind of product and how much of it they're purchasing and putting down. And it also has some new provisions in it that should make it a little bit easier for them to inspect those products. Another one of the changes that I think is really important and that I would love to spread the word about a little bit more, and I look forward to when this gets implemented, is it will require vendors that are selling fertilizer products on island to label them as to whether they are BMP compliant or not. So that when somebody walks into, say, a Marine Home Center or any garden center on island and is going to get fertilizer to take home and put in their yard, they can see, oh, on this shelf, because we can't regulate what the vendors are selling, but we could require them to label that these products, if you follow the label, then they will be BMP compliant. These products, if you follow the label, are not BMP compliant. So what's the obvious choice? And just make it much more clear for people who are buying the products to know which are the products to use and which are not. So that's another part of the changes.
Is there ever hope in the future that if we felt that Nantucket really needs to have an all-out ban, at least for, a 2-year trial period to see if it makes a difference? I mean, so many people say they feel fertilizer has such a negative effect on our harbor, and we see so many lush green lawns coming down to the harbor's edge. I'm just curious if there were a movement in that direction, if the Land Council were willing to invest in representation and be willing to lobby for local control in that aspect.
I think we will always be all for reducing fertilizer use as much as possible, particularly in the harbor watershed and in the watershed of those sensitive areas, and that further reductions would be great. Obviously, there's a balance that needs to be there, and we've made great strides. And I'm hoping that some of the isotope research that we're doing on the eelgrass, as far as the nitrogen data and giving us a sense of where the nutrients are coming from, whether it's more likely fertilizer or wastewater, that over time, if there's further reduction in fertilizer use, that we might actually be able to see some of that in this ongoing health assessment data moving forward. But
Mr. Pronk?
We've banned plastic bags and we've banned balloons. Why can't we ban certain types of fertilizer?
you're not gonna hear much argument from me. Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Ginger?
I just wanted to ask if you think that irrigation is a factor in increasing the speed of the flow of fertilizer to the harbor.
Definitely, and I think that another one of the changes to the fertilizer regs that are being proposed right now is an adjustment to the start date of when fertilizer can be applied. And there are some exceptions to this, but for the most part, now instead of April 15th, I think it's April 30th or May 1st, is going to be the new start date for fertilizer application. And that has to do not only with the fact that it's still really rainy season, but also ground temperature. So in the early part of the season, when the ground's not really warm enough and the plants aren't really stimulated to grow and to use the fertilizer, then there's really no need to be putting it out then. And particularly when we get more rain that time of year too, then you're really asking for a compounded effect of putting it out there when the plants can't use it and then having it wash away. But definitely irrigation can be, and if it's done properly and you're only putting small amounts down that the plants can actually use at a time and they can take it up and it doesn't all get washed away. But that's why the slow release component of the regulations is really important as well, instead of the quick release fertilizers, so that it doesn't all wash away. But yeah, irrigation can. Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
board members, any questions for Emily? Emily, the voice of the Land Council has long been widely trusted and well heard, and we hope you can continue that. We expect that you will, and if for any reason you feel you need the support of this board, please come in and ask for it, and we're making it a point to bring our advisements in person to the select board and read them out loud so that they're heard not just by the board but the whole public who's watching. So I think the entire island needs a louder voice for the sake of the environment. There's a lot of strides that have been made, and there is a lot of work in progress, but I think a lot more public outreach, education, and awareness needs to be spread. Thank you so much for coming in.
so much.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Excuse me, did anybody from the public wish to ask anything of Emily? Thank you. Moving back to old business. On the hazardous materials containment and collection, as I said, Rob McNeil had a presentation at the NSA last night, Nantucket Shellfish Association, and he mostly talked about changes with the landfill and how they're collecting waste. But as far as hazardous waste, he did mention and was quite adamant that they're not interested in pursuing to build a facility where it can be collected on a more available basis. He did mention having adding on to the take it or leave it so that unused cans of paint can be brought out and shared with others. But as far as the hazardous waste goes, it is on his radar, and they are making some changes, although the select board did vote to add 2 more collection days, which would make it 8, because we've historically had 6 collection days. But he mentioned last night that there's still only 6 scheduled per year. They've reached out to more commercial people, especially by making it free for commercial to bring in their material. But there still seems to be a missing link for all commercial entities to be signing up with the DEP as registered creators of hazardous waste. Anybody creating a very small amount who is in business commercially, contractor, painter, are supposed to be registered. And it's my belief that this needs to be followed up somewhere here. The ball is dropped between the Cape and here, and I personally feel that it's the building department that needs to pick up this ball, and because all the projects go through the building department for their permitting, so they need to be notified of how to be handling their waste. If anybody has any ideas on how to move forward with this, I certainly want to keep it on our radar and present substantial advisements when we can create them to the board.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Franzuto.
have you talked to the new building commissioner?
I have.
What was his response?
Well, I spoke with them about having a separate container at each site, that every site has a dumpster. The dumpster has become a convenient place to throw everything. And I know this personally, seeking firewood out of dumpsters. It's amazing what you find in these job site dumpsters. It's not just what's coming from the job site. A lot of people from the public or workers on the job bring household items in there. There's anything from, fans to heaters to appliances, and there's hazardous waste in these dumpsters also. The assistant building inspector was there. He felt that in his 30 years of being in the building trades, everybody's doing the right thing. I beg to differ. I've been in the building trades for 30 years, and I've seen it actually get worse instead of better, especially with the introduction of the dumpster on the job sites. In the 90s, early 90s, there were no dumpsters. And you took care of everything individually. You loaded up your pickup truck and you went to the dump with it. And it's a different, it's a whole different thing today. Progress has to move fast. It's about bottom line and deadline. And personally, that's why I get out of the business. It's very demanding. It moves quickly, and I don't think our infrastructure has. I think we have a lot of catching up to do with the rate of development here and how it affects our environment.
I will again reiterate, we need to take a meeting and dedicate it to this topic so we can come up with something that we're going to recommend. Something instead of just, and I'm not knocking our efforts to date, but comprehensive advisory to the selectmen. We think you guys should be doing this, so it's on paper and presented to them the way we have it at public comment. One of the things in there, there's got to be a way to contain whatever flows out of the dumpsters onto the ground. I mean, watertight dumpsters, some way to collect that fluid or whatever is going in there?
Well, twofold. If they all had a cover on them, we wouldn't see so much airborne plastic waste.
Right.
There's wrappers and materials used on job sites that are spread throughout neighborhoods, and it's disgusting to watch. It's disrespectful, it's irresponsible, and I think contractors need more than a slap on the wrist for this. The impact that they're having in every neighborhood that they're working on. It's what I see is literally disgusting in my eyes, and I never thought I'd, if you asked me 10 years ago if I was gonna, be speaking out in the name of the environment, I'd probably have snickered at you, but there's some bad examples out there today. So, as I've said before, if we're going to go to the board, we have to be well prepared and well rehearsed and well researched. And I don't want to go back with a recommendation that we haven't researched enough. I'd like to continue with pushing for a collection facility, whether it's at the landfill or whether it's out behind the airport, an industrial road. But first, I really think we need to somehow come up with an estimate of what this building would cost. I think it would be probably under $1 million. And, if we have to go forward with some type of an article at the annual town meeting for this appropriation, maybe that would be a direction to go. So, Peter, maybe our next meeting could be a workshop, or our second meeting in June could be a workshop, and we could, meantime, if board members are willing to assist with some research, and maybe we can come up with something more substantial to present. Any
comments, questions on that? Mr. Chairman, I think it's important to document, if the building department feels it's not a problem, I think it's important to somehow document that they might be mistaken.
This reminds me of Steve Bender and his claims of gray water or worse being dumped and no proof. And, I sat down with him and I was like, can you send your son out in a dinghy in the middle of the night with a camera? Because we need some pictures. And who has the time for this? I've often thought of citizen patrol. And just simply cruising around with a coffee and videotaping and filming daily happenings, and it's amazing what you see. I mean, there's already websites out there, right? Nantucket.
Squatters.
Yeah. So.
Mr. Chairman, to Peter Brace's point, you get a heavy rainstorm and the stuff running out of the dumpster is obviously running down the curb and into the storm drain. So those are the types of photographs and documentation that you need.
Well, I was actually thinking more of when it enters the dump and the dumpster is dumped, you could see what was put in it.
Every one of them goes into the C&D building, and sure, you can certainly. I mean, they've had programs there at the landfill recently. McNeil's, they were opening garbage bags to see what, on average, is in everybody's household garbage. Have they looked in the C&D building? I don't know. It gets mashed up so fast by an excavator and then stuffed into trucks and shipped off island. But really, it's at the job site where it's sitting for weeks at a time. As Mr. Franzuto said, they tilt them up so the rainwater washes out, and whatever has been put in there that's underneath everything else, it's getting saturated and rolling out the back. And whether it's ending up in streets or storm drains or simply in the soil, to me, it's they're both wrong. So how do we get a handle on it? I don't know. Go home and think about it and give me a call. I'm available anytime. I love to talk about it. Any other thoughts? Our goals and objectives discussion. Again, maybe workshop meeting. Comments?
I think a workshop meeting is a good idea then.
So you're thinking one or two topics for the workshop? So hazardous materials, and then goals and objectives in the other half, something like that.
I mean, new board members, anything, if have you thought, or do you have a mental list of goals and objectives that are on your mind that you'd like to introduce?
Not yet, but I was hoping, Peter, last meeting there was something that was passed around but wasn't for retention for me, of past goals and objectives. So
Yeah, I can email it again to you guys.
Could you send that to me?
Sure.
Thanks.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a few things that, I'd like to see us work on, and Chapter 91 compliance, a lot of it is environmental, stormwater remediation and maintenance to facilities and things like that. Dan Pronk and I were talking, just briefly about the fuel situation at Great Harbor Yacht Club, affordable fuel for commercial operations, but just Chapter 91 compliance island-wide. For those guys, if you don't know what Chapter 91 is Chapter 91 is the rules, Mass General Law that governs what can take place in the watershed and in areas along the harbor, along with the Harbor Overlay District and things like that. So I think that's something I'd like to bring forward to the board to have some discussion on. I've been doing a lot of Chapter 91 work. Excuse me. With for the planning folks about the properties that are like along still dock, which are landlocked, but they're built on filled tidelands. So they're required to have a Chapter 91 permit, but they never have. One of the compliant things about Chapter 91 is you have to provide some type of public benefit or public good, be it bathrooms or walkways or public access. So anyway, that's something I think is really important to get, more maintain and increase access to the harbor. It's not infectious, it's just a normal cough.
I'm just gonna move over an inch or two.
It's allergy season.
No, it's
Duck season.
bad cigar.
Those are curable by stopping.
Dave, any other comments on goals and objectives? Okay, dredging plan update. Is there something you'd like to fill us in on with this?
I talked to the consultant yesterday. The woman who is actually doing the dredge plan, I think I said it at a previous meeting, she's probably one of the best, most experienced dredge permitting people at least in the Northeast. But anyway, she's not going to be back until Memorial Day, but I talked to another person in their office, and they're anticipating to have that report out in early June. For you guys, so you understand what we're talking about, is dredging has become a lot more complicated and difficult to obtain the permits over time, and it's certainly gotten more expensive. So we decided a couple years ago and we got funding at town meeting, to $125,000 or $150,000 to develop a dredge plan, which would basically is a matrix that shows what has been dredged in the past, what needs to be dredged in the future that has never been dredged. Easy Street happens to be is one that comes to mind, at Easy Street Basin. Easy Street Basin has lost about 2.5 feet over the last 25 years. And get these dredge projects permitted and on a schedule. So permitting that used to take 6 months now takes almost 3 years. And the funding is very, very difficult to come by. So one of the ways to fund or assist to fund dredging projects in the future is a sandbank. So we established a sandbank. For instance, when we dredged Pulpus Harbor last year, 9,000 cubic yards, that sand is stored out on an approved storage site out by the airport. That sand can be sold for beach nourishment or Sconset Beach Preservation or anybody that needs sand. And that money can be used for future dredging projects. But until you know what needs to be dredged, when it was last dredged, the volumes, it's just a catch as catch can. It becomes a crisis situation where the channel's not navigable anymore, so we must need to dredge. But if you say that today, you're 3 years out. So this plan will set this down so can start working on this. Pulpus, I use Pulpus as an example. It was dredged in 63, 93, and last year. So it can be on a schedule. When Emily and Tara were talking about Hither Creek, it's a perfect example. Last time Hither Creek was dredged was 1985. Okay, it needs to be dredged again if you want to improve water quality in that water body. You got to dredge that channel. So anyway, that's what the dredge plan is all about. So we're hoping to have that beginning of June.
So this actual plan is being built right now?
Yeah.
The matrix you're talking about?
It certainly is.
Okay.
Well, when I first got on this board, I was concerned about dredging, and having grown up in this harbor and learned how to drive on our harbor beaches starting at 8 years old, I've seen a lot of changes, and I would love to show everybody in this room the differences that I have seen and how much sand has washed off of our harbor shorelines, starting at Washington Street to Monomoy, to Quays, to Pocomo, to Walwinet, and all the way around to the first point tip of Cotuh. We have lost millions of yards of sand into the harbor. And I'm not a scientist. I don't know, the negative effects completely, but it can't be good to have all this granular sand washing into the harbor and covering eelgrass beds. When Cormac was in, he did mention that the granular sand was probably not the best substrate for eelgrass to be able to attach to. And at that same meeting, Jeff Carlson was here, and he mentioned some mooring handlers and other people who keep mooring, saying where they used to set their mooring in 6 feet of water, now it's in 4.5 or 4 feet of water. And unlike our eastern and southern shores, this sand is not laterally moving out of the harbor, I don't believe. It's staying slumped somewhere in the harbor. And one of the biggest, most recent tidbits of news on this is, if you all remember when the Gamble House was being built on Pocomo Point in the 80s, it was a huge controversy. Well, now I'm told that the Gamble House has to be moved back because of erosion. And I'm thinking, that is a big bluff. That is a lot of soil that is washed into the harbor to have to justify moving that house back. But at the same token, I'd want to know from especially our biologists and our specialists who are up to speed on this. And just as recent as last night, Tara, you mentioned that, you're concerned with dredging. It sounded to me like would be, how we're stirring up contaminants and sediments that are settled, and the negative effect that can have on the ecosystem. I'd certainly, want to weigh in that information, along with my strong feeling that there must be some type. Can you research a friendly type of dredging? Can we get one of these guys from the Bering Sea who sucks up sand to find gold? Can they gently remove sand from an eelgrass bed till they see the old eelgrass that's buried 1.5 feet under there, and stop and move on? Is there a gentle way of doing this that can actually, because when I look at the Cape Cod Times report on how many dredging projects are taking place by the Barnstable County Dredge, they're not just for navigable reasons. Some of their reasons are for shellfish bed improvement. So, in the future, if you could help us with some of that information as we continue our discussion on dredging and how the biology relates to it, we'd love to know. So in our future, that'll be part of our discussion. If you could help us out with a bit of research on it and come in with some facts, that would be wonderful. Because your opinion and your research and your information that you bring into us, Tara, is always well trusted also, so thank you. Board member comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Ginger?
I'm not advocating for this, but I'm just offering it as a thought. And historically, back to the whaling days, it was a problem getting into the harbor. and the camels were made as a way to float things over the bar at high tide. But I just offer the thought that if we consider what would happen if humans were not involved in attempting to do these projects for their own uses, what would Nantucket be like? And one thought that occurred to me at one point is that if it could be considered as being like a barrier island attempting to move north, what would happen is that the harbor would close completely, sediments would settle out, it would eventually become salt marsh. Coatue would be the barrier beach that washes in over and forms dunes, and that the migration of sand tends to be soundward rather than seaward. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to consider what the natural processes might be while we're planning to interact with them. Just as a thought, not advocating one way or the other.
We will certainly entertain information from all sides.
It's purely
on this.
Speculation, I have to say. However,
no, you're absolutely right. The island is moving. It's like northwest, is it? It's definitely shifting.
it depends on which day you're asking.
There were telephone poles on Coatue, and they were on the dune side of the Carter the Bay, and they're now on the beach in the harbor.
Well, there were
Still
telephone
sticking up
poles
out of the
on
ground.
Smith's Point. I mean, I can remember those.
Yeah, right.
Sure.
And they're in the ocean. Board comments? Public comment? Seeing none? Recap items for next meeting? Thoughts on when our workshop meeting ought to be? With all this information in our heads, maybe we ought to make it our first meeting of June?
Closer we get to 4th of July, the busier we all get.
I think that'd be great.
Okay. Workshop, specifically, Peter, means?
Specifically means we don't follow the normal agenda. We just pick the items that we're going to talk about, and that's that. And we don't necessarily, the public can attend. We can specify, well, if you read the back of our agenda, public comment is not something that's a right of people who attend meetings that are held for the public. So we can certainly say we're not going to take public comment, but we're pretty formal. We're informal here, so it'll probably be, we'll be lucky if we get this many people anyway. So,
It's not giving away free beer.
but the whole thing is intended to be focused on those one issues, to solve them, to move forward with them if we can. So.
Mr. Chairman, so the two issues are going to be the goals and objectives and the hazardous material?
Yeah, trying to compile maybe another letter of advisement of some sort in that area, at least discussing it and gathering some more information.
Okay.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think
All right.
that'd be plenty.
It probably will be.
Mr. Chairman, I think staying focused is a good, way to proceed.
Ginger, you're just, inspiration for me. Thank
And,
you, Mr. Brace.
We should specify the amount of time we're going to spend on each thing, so we don't, run on and on and on about one thing and don't get the other done, and if we, just set a limit of hours.
Our meeting's not going to be more than an hour and a half. I'll keep it at that right now.
Well, it'll be a 2-hour block, but.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And that's not a personal attack, it's just to say.
No.
It's for us for us to be motivated to solve the problem, to realize that there's a time constraint, and, yeah.
If there's no more discussion, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Thanks for joining us tonight. Conan, I didn't leave you out, did I? Something you wanted to